New details on that terror attack in Paris at one of the most visited tourist sites in the world. A man armed with a hammer and knives targeting police outside Notre Dame Cathedral. Inside, hundreds on lockdown, sitting in the pews with their arms in the air.
Yes, this morning, the Paris prosecutor confirming that a declaration of allegiance to ISIS was found in the attacker's apartment, even though the authorities had no previous knowledge of him.
At 4:20 p.m. local time Tuesday, surveillance video shows a man wielding a hammer attack an officer standing guard outside the cathedral, reportedly shouting, "This is for Syria. Watch again." Within seconds, another officer shoots and wounds the attacker as people on the plaza scatter. Lying on the ground, police say he shouted, "I am a soldier of the caliphate." An Algerian identity card was found on him. Cell phone video recorded by an American tourist, Carl Riches, shows an officer standing over the assailant.
We heard the 2 gunshots and he had blood coming out from his leg.
As police rushed to the scene, at least 900 people were kept inside the 12th century church. And look at this, a startling image from the pews. People ordered to put their hands up. Nancy Soderberg, a former American ambassador to the UN, was there.
They made us put our hands up, saying that there may be accomplices there, so we're going to search everything. And that's when people got really quiet and very nervous. And that was kind of scary because people thought there might be one of the attackers inside the church.
A priest said the Lord's Prayer to help calm people, held inside for what one witness says felt like 2 hours.
It was nice to be around people from all over the world, kind of getting through it, sitting calmly together.
This morning, the attacker is in hospital being guarded by police. France has been under a state of emergency since 2015. And since then, there have been 4 attacks on the security services.
Muslims must do more to stop terror attacks from happening again, a senior British police chief has said, claiming there's alarm and concern that the Islamic community gave no warning of Saturday's terrorist strike in London.
The Muslim community appeals to all sections within their own communities to root out the scourge of terrorism, which hides amongst their own people and masquerades as Islam. Terrorism and extremism is hurting Islam. Muslims must do more to stop such attacks from happening again, and we want to know how we can play a greater role in the future.
Commander Mac Chisti, who is the highest-ranking police officer of the Muslim faith in the Met, has said those close to the assailants must have known something about the plot. London's Mayor Sadiq Khan, who has faced flack from US President Donald Trump, has said the ideology that the 3 attackers followed has no place in Islam.
These 3 men who committed this act of terror, these terrorists who killed a number of people, injured many others, they believe in a perverse, twisted, poisonous form of Islam, which I don't recognise and doesn't represent the faith that I know.
The government's community secretary, Sajid Javid, himself a Muslim, has also said the UK's Islamic community must do more than simply condemn terror attacks, echoing Prime Minister Theresa May's belief that Britain has been far too tolerant of extremism.
After 3 deadly terror attacks in as many months, Britain's Prime Minister said that she's prepared now to rewrite current human rights laws if they get in the way of attempts to implement new anti-terror legislation. Meantime, British authorities have revealed more details about one of the London Bridge attackers. It's emerged that as well as appearing in that documentary called The Jihadis Next Door, he also worked on the London Underground.
Unnerving for many, this. What more are we hearing?
This, of course, is a major concern for many Londoners who use and tourists who use the tube to come to work and to travel around the city. The tube system's frequented by millions of people every day. It's a network of tunnels, of course, which is also a deeply sensitive thing. We understand that he trained at West Kensington tube station, but he moved around from there and had access to all sorts of sensitive areas because of that. He also, for a time, we understand, worked at Westminster Tube, just a stone's throw from the Houses of Parliament, and from Westminster Tube there's a network of tunnels that runs under the Houses of Parliament. So it really doesn't bear thinking about from where we're standing here.
Brussels warns it could sanction member states that don't follow EU quota rules for asylum seekers. The European Commission says it may take legal action as early as next week. The warning comes after the Czech Republic, which has protested quotas from the start, said it would not take in any more migrants before the plan expires in September. The Czech interior minister said the government approved the suspension of this system for the Czech Republic because of the deteriorating security situation and the malfunctioning of the entire relocation system. The government also urged the interior minister to end all activities in these areas, so the Czech Republic will no longer take part in the relocation of migrants arriving in Greece and Italy. The Czech Republic has reportedly only taken in a dozen migrants out of a quota of some 2,600. Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia have also refused to take part in the scheme.
In an interview with the Times of Israel today, he's saying that Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is intentionally flooding Europe with Muslims in an attempt to Islamize the continent. Yalon says Erdogan is acting like a leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, heavily subsidizing flights from Turkey to Europe for Muslim migrants, and encouraging Turks in Europe to increase their birth rate. He argues that Erdogan is funding mosques and Islamic centers in the Balkans in an effort to expand Turkish and Islamic hegemony there.
An attack on Iran's parliament witnessed by people nearby who posted on social media. State TV reports several attackers stormed the building. One of them blew himself up with a suicide bomb. Security forces rushed to the scene.
We were standing here and heard that the police said there were 5 people who went inside and started shooting. We even saw one of them getting shot in the heart. And then they put him into a wheelchair and took him to hospital. People are saying that ISIL has done this. Everyone is saying one thing or another. I don't know who is behind this attack.
ISIL have claimed responsibility for the assault on Parliament and for a second attack on the shrine of former Supreme Leader Ruhollah Khomeini. Iranian security forces have also reported to have stopped a third attack. The areas around both the Parliament and shrine are open to the public. A number of people were wounded in both attacks.
I went to the hospital after 5 minutes. 2 or 3 minutes later I heard gunfire, and then it became busy. The security forces arrived, they closed the street, and it remained as such since.
The Minister of the Interior says the situation is now under control, but all roads leading to and from Parliament remain closed.
Russia has condemned the deadly attacks in the Iranian capital, Tehran. The Kremlin spokesman says that Moscow decisively condemned such terrorist attacks. Russia called for greater coordination in the fight against the Daesh terrorist group. It says a continuation of a series of terror attacks underlines the need for coordinated action in the fight against terror. The European Union's foreign policy chief, Federica Mogherini, has also expressed solidarity with the Iranian people following the acts of terror in Tehran. Mogherini said today is, quote, a very sad day. The Socialists and Democrats group in the European Parliament has strongly condemned the attacks as well. The group said terrorism knows no boundaries and the fight against it requires unity.
For the second time in 3 weeks, the United States has attacked government forces in Syria. The attack took place in the region of Al-Tanf, which is a strategic location on the road between Baghdad and Damascus. Now, just like last time, the United States says that the area is a well-established deconfliction zone and that they were simply protecting themselves.
That was, again, as the chairman pointed out, self-defense of our forces inside an established and agreed upon deconfliction zone.
The only deconfliction zones on the map in Syria are the ones established by Iran, Turkey, and Russia, and even these are still in the process of being formed.
Now work is underway to finalize specific details related to security, monitoring of the fulfillment of the ceasefire obligations, and other details related to the establishment of crossing points to and from the safe zones.
Reuters has reported that a military alliance fighting in support of President Bashar al-Assad said on Wednesday it could hit U.S. positions in Syria, warning that its self-restraint over U.S. airstrikes on government forces would end if Washington crossed red lines. The threat came in a statement in the name of the commander of the operations room of the forces allied to Syria and was circulated by a military news unit run by the Lebanese group Hezbollah, one of Assad's military allies. Assad's allies also include Iran and Russia. The statement did not spell out whether Moscow was a signatory to it.
The IDF is now holding a surprise drill in northern Israel, simulating the outbreak of a full-scale war with Hezbollah.
The two-day exercise began on Sunday with the amassing of troops from the Golani Brigade, the Commando Brigade, and other special forces, as well as troops from the IDF's Northern Command. The soldiers were transported in planes and helicopters, and a senior IDF officer says that the goal of the exercise was to practice switching quickly from routine situations to war scenarios. The officer is not disclosing what situation in the simulation caused the outbreak of war, but it does involve Hezbollah carrying out a terror attack against IDF troops. IDF Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot visited Northern Command while the exercise was happening, and he told IDF officers that the only way to prevent war is to ensure your preparedness.
Jordan and the West African country of Mauritania have either downgraded or cut diplomatic ties with Qatar in the deepening row over Doha's alleged support for terrorists. With several Gulf states cutting transport links and Qatar responding likewise, there is major disruption to airspace in the region. Qatar's foreign minister has denied the allegations, accusing Saudi Arabia and of other states of fabricating stories and of vilifying his country. Even though Qatar hosts the largest US base in the region, the US State Department has said the country could do more to fight terrorism.
We recognize that Qatar has made some great efforts to try to stop financing of terror groups, including prosecuting suspected financiers, freezing assets, and introducing stringent controls on its banking system there. However, let me make this clear, they have made progress, but they still have work to do.
The dispute between Qatar and the Arab world's biggest powers has reopened a festering wound only 2 weeks after US President Donald Trump called on Muslim states to fight terrorism.
Meanwhile, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has called for a solution to the crisis. In a meeting with foreign ambassadors in Ankara, he stressed Turkey's support for Qatar.
We are making an effort to find a swift resolution to end this crisis in the Gulf, and I hope all sanctions imposed on Qatar will be lifted. It is a very serious allegation to call Qatar a supporter of terrorism. During my term in office as Prime Minister and President over the last 15 years, I've gotten to know them well. If the allegations were true, I would be the first leader to oppose Qatar. I don't believe the allegations are true. There is a game being played, and I don't know who is behind this game.
Now, with the Gulf state of Qatar facing isolation by its neighbours, media in the US are finding new reasons for the row on the Arabian Peninsula. The country is accused of supporting terrorism and interfering in the internal affairs of other Arab states. But, according to CNN, it's Russian hackers who are to blame.
Russian hackers were behind a cyber breach against Qatar's state news agency. The hackers planted a false news report friendly to Iran and critical of President Donald Trump.
And surprise, surprise, it's Russian hackers. According to CNN, those pesky Russian hackers planted a fake news report on Qatar news agency, attributing false remarks to the nation's ruler that had a friendly tone towards Iran and Israel, with whom Qatar has a less than favorable relationship, and also questioned how long Trump would hold his position in the White House. According to anonymous sources, Russia is attempting to cause rifts among the US and its allies any way possible. And as CNN sees it, the recent divide between Qatar and its neighbors was actually caused by this false news report, not support of terrorism. They themselves write that the intelligence gathered only indicates Russians were involved. And if we've learned anything lately, it's that leaving behind false traces during a cyber attack is all too easy. But it's a hacking story, so, of course, it must have been the Russians.
On Wednesday, the Kremlin claimed that no preparations were underway for a meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and U.S. President Donald Trump. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov made the statement in a conference call with reporters, saying there was still no firm date set for the meeting, which could potentially take place at the same time as the G20 meeting in Germany in July. During the same conference call, Peskov also told reporters that Moscow considered the decision by European Union ambassadors to extend sanctions which place a raft of restrictions on annexed Crimea illegal, saying it would hurt European producers.
The European Union has unveiled plans to integrate Europe's military and defense industries for the first time ever. It's part of a Franco-German initiative to improve security and increase efficiency across the bloc. The EU's foreign policy chief says it's also a way to relaunch the alliance.
It's a matter of maximizing the added value that the European Union can bring to the EU member states' work on security and defence, including through more cooperation.
While exact funding depends on individual governments, the Commission says it will put up at least €1.5 billion a year from its budget for research and development.
We will use EU budget resources for prototype financing. So there must be 3 companies minimum from 2 countries minimum who can apply resources, grant money for building joint prototypes.
The EU has also made it clear it wants to set up a military headquarters for training missions abroad to make it easier to use EU battle groups that have never been deployed. France also wants to establish a coalition of countries willing to conduct military operations together rather than leave future peacekeeping missions to bigger states.
Japan is expected to deploy its first batch of F-35 stealth fighters by the end of this year, jets which are being assembled in Japan. They're part of an upgrade to Tokyo's already formidable Air Force and could set some nerves on edge in the region.
At a ceremony held on Monday at Toyoyama in Aichi Prefecture, Japan publicly unveiled its first domestically assembled F-35A stealth fighter jet. The aircraft is the first of 38 which will be licensed produced in Japan by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, in addition to the 4 that have already been assembled and delivered from the U.S. Japanese Air Self-Defense Force is slated to deploy its first licensed-built F-35 at Misawa Air Base at the northern tip of the island of Honshu later this year. The new jets are a part of Tokyo's ambitious rearmament plan, which is also procuring other types of advanced U.S.-made aircraft, such as the MV-22 tilt-rotor transport aircraft, Global Hawk surveillance drones, and E-2D Hawkeye early warning aircraft. Japan's record defense spending is reflective of its growing wariness of North Korea, with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe describing Pyongyang's nuclear and ballistic missile threats as a plague that could spread and destabilize a wider region if left unchecked. Although Article 9 of Japan's pacifist constitution forbids the country from engaging in war, its neighbors remain on guard over Abe's recent efforts to expand the role of Japan's military.
South Korea's presidential office says the ongoing deployment of the THAAD anti-missile system will be suspended for now. It also says the system would be subject to a full-blown environmental impact assessment. So far, 2 THAAD launchers have been deployed out of the total 6 that make up a THAAD battery. The presidential office says the additional 4 will have to wait until the end of this assessment.
Hawaii is the first state in the U.S. that will legally enforce parts of the Paris Agreement. Governor David Ige signed 2 bills Tuesday that reflect climate goals in the Paris Accord. One bill aims to cut greenhouse gas emissions statewide. The other bill creates a task force that will work to improve the soil and capture and store carbon dioxide. President Donald Trump said the U.S. would abandon the agreement last week after months of suspense. Many world leaders and U.S. politicians urged him to stay. After the announcement, a handful of states, including Hawaii, Washington, and New York, pledged to uphold the treaty's goals. California Governor Jerry Brown took it even further. Brown signed agreements with officials in China, pledging to work together on developing clean energy and cutting greenhouse gas emissions.
California and China are joining forces in the fight against climate change. Today, during his trip to Beijing, Governor Jerry Brown signed an agreement with China to work together to reduce carbon emissions.
To make the shift from the carbon age to a decarbonized world requires everyone. Certainly China is playing a leading role.
Speaking through an interpreter, China's Minister of Science and Technology saying he looks forward to that partnership. With the U.S. stepping back, California is stepping up, but the governor says everyone needs to do more.
The world is not doing enough. We're on the road to a very negative and disastrous future.
Brown later met China's president and says the two pledged to expand trade between California and China with an emphasis on green technologies to fight climate change, and says he believes the White House will come around soon.
It's only temporary. It's only temporary.
Meanwhile, in a press conference in New Zealand yesterday, U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson reaffirmed the United States' commitment to combat climate change, saying it will be even stronger than before.
I don't think anyone should interpret that the U.S. has somehow stepped away from these issues or is seeking to isolate itself.
Dog flu has resurfaced in the U.S. Officials trace the start of the new outbreak to dog shows in Georgia or Florida. The H3N2 canine virus appeared in South Korea 10 years ago, first as an avian flu strain that later adapted to dogs. The disease is considered highly contagious. When H3N2 appeared in the U.S. in 2015, over 1,000 dogs in Chicago got the virus. Medical professionals are worried because H3N2 is appearing in states that had no recorded cases, like Florida, and it's already spread to Kentucky and Tennessee.